Hi there. Welcome to Not Too Tight, Not Too Loose, the podcast about finding balance in the pursuit of well-being. I'm Joe Flanders. Happy to welcome my good friend Andrew Rose back. Andrew, how you doing today?
I'm good, Joe.
That's good. Glad to hear that. So, I introduced you to my friend Sarah Bergenfield, and just get the audience on board here. So, Sarah is a therapist. She's an IFS practitioner. She's actually kind of like one of the well-known, better-known kind of educators and trainers at the IFS Institute. So she's a well-known IFS practitioner. She's autistic herself and specializes in supporting people with autism. And she's written this really cool book and speaks a lot about bringing in what she calls the predictive processing framework to helping people with autism and generally across therapeutic contexts. So the predictive processing framework for helping people understand themselves, for helping people with autism understand their condition, their situation. And I just wanted to bring her in because I've just had some amazing conversations with her about this stuff. She claims that predictive processing is coming for therapy. It's this new paradigm that's going to be really influential. And I think I agree. And I think predictive processing is super relevant more generally because it's one of the kind of basic building blocks of the AIs that we're interacting with a fair bit. And so it just seemed like a cool opportunity to, have one of these conversations on this platform and introduce everyone else, including you, to Sarah. Curious what your impressions were.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel like I was being invited into a rich sort of sparring space, as it were. It was a time sprawling conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and also really got into the nooks and crannies of some stuff.
Yeah.
Hopefully, folks will find the conversation enlightening and interesting. I know it was fun. It was fun to sort of get in the mix with the two of you. I hung back for a little bit, I think, but then we got into it. Yeah.
Anything in particular kind of stand out for you as a highlight or a low light, or what stayed with you?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were a few things. I think so we start off talking about autism and neurodivergence, and it's something a real interest of mine. I have a son who's on the spectrum and neurodivergent generally, and I think we raised some interesting questions. I'm not sure we solved them, but we got into some interesting material first around trying to level set around some of the historical and more pathological framing for understanding what autism is, much of which has been contested and countered in recent years, and with views that see folks as having not a deficit, but as having different brains and different ways of being in the world that are equally valid. It's just that the world isn't equipped or built to support them, right? I think we tried to sort of grapple with some of the implications of that, and to what extent it's possible to sort of change the world. Why is the world this way? Like, why are what do we do to support these people? And also having honest conversations about, well, hold on, what does it actually mean? Are there still there's still ways that people are really having a hard time? Is that a deficit? How do we support them? And I'm not sure we really solved those questions. We get into talking about some of the similarities in symptoms or ways of being between folks on the spectrum and with PTSD, for example. And it's like, well, wait a second, is one of them has something that we're going to try and cure, but we're not going to try and cure the other person, right, of their autism. So what does that mean, right? I'm not sure we answered that question well, but Sarah had a really good way of orienting back to, well, this is how we support them, right? This is how we help folks navigate the world better. And I really appreciated that about her orientation. And predictive processing is really, where she landed on that.
I thought you did a really nice job of framing that discussion around like, okay, if people are suffering, do we change the world so they suffer less, or do we invite them and support them in adapting their own ways of operating and being to adapt to the world as it is. Again, no clear answer, but really interesting, inquiry into that tension. And yes, the predictive processing framework does offer a cool way in, a cool way to think about it. Do you buy that this is coming? That this is going to be something people are going to be talking about in therapy, and like will be much more of a metaphor that people use in the way they talk about themselves or talk about relationships and things like that?
Well, I mean, clearly it's here. I know because we have recorded another podcast with Jonas Mago, who's also really into this work, and it's coming up more and more. I don't know. So Sarah, there's a couple moments in the episode where Sarah's like, you can apply it to everything. There's like, there's just a slight twinkle of slight evangelical twinkle in the eye that I'm always just a little bit cautious of. But folks have that feeling about things for a reason sometimes, and it certainly does work. This idea of and not only works, it's what's nice about it is that it fits with other pieces. It doesn't come in and it doesn't totally change the paradigm or shift everything. Actually, it complements frameworks. Or so we talk about mindfulness. We talk about updating our models. We talk about changing behavior. A lot of the practices and a lot of the ways we engage with it, it's very consistent with frameworks we already have, including IFS. Right? There's a very seamless segue there, and she works with IFS and predictive processing. It's not like they're conflicting. They're very, very complementary.
Yeah, I found that not obvious how predictive processing becomes a theme in therapy, but she suggests that it's going to be extremely helpful for people to understand themselves and why they're behaving in certain ways and feeling certain things. Mm-hmm. And she actually just took us through, I think, 2 examples of that. One is obviously autism, where she specializes. And I think and I've actually talked to clients about this. It's an extremely powerful way for people to understand their own reactivity, the predictive processing framework. And similarly, trauma. I think she's got a beautiful way of describing trauma in an IFS framework, but applying predictive processing. So just like really nice, juicy bits there. And then, of course, as I said, and as comes up, it is fundamental to the math and the basic architecture of the large language models that that are ubiquitous now and that are slowly taking over our lives. And we get into that in a way that, I don't know, it felt like a little bit of a digression or a tangent or something, but I personally found really fun. Curious what your reaction to that portion was.
I think there's a moment in the episode where we're talking about AI and you asked me what I think. I think it's a little bit quaint, right? So that's just how I would if this is the first moment on the podcast where we talk about AI and therapy. It might sound silly in 6 months or six days, but I think it's a good starting point, right? Sarah has some skepticism and maybe even less experience working with it directly in the therapeutic lens versus you or I. So I think it's nevertheless a good entry point to start talking about some of the stuff that we're all apparently doing with AI right now, right? No, I appreciate it. I appreciated that part of the conversation as well, divergent as it might have been.
We better get this episode out ASAP before the new model for an OpenAI makes this whole thing completely ridiculous. So yeah, let's get to it. We'll let folks in. Sarah Bergenfield, welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Hi, Joe. Hi, Andrew. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Welcome to Not Too Tight, Not Too Loose.
Yeah, good to be here.
So excited. I've had some caffeine because I know we're going on a ride here. It's always so fun to talk to you, and I'm really excited that other people get the chance to hear it on this platform. So why don't we just start with a bio? Tell us about yourself and your work, and then about this upcoming book that I'm super excited about.
Sure. So I am a certified IFS practitioner, level 3 certified. I do a ton of teaching in the IFS world and also in other areas too. I have a master's in embodiment studies. I'm an autistic and I come from a family of autistics. I am a wife and a mum to 3 children, one of whom who definitely has autism has been diagnosed. And then the other one has some neurospicy moments, we'll call them. My master's thesis, which I wrote on autism as an embodied condition, is the foundation of my book that is coming out next year, that is now co-written with Martha Sweezy. And it's called Wired to Feel. And it's like a study and an exploration of autism as a condition of surplus, meaning we're sort of connected to everything. So it sort of challenges the old tropes of autistics as being removed from everything, and actually offers an alternative explanation that the reason for many of our challenges is because we're actually connected to everything.
So I want to pick up this theme of challenging old tropes. I've followed your work. I've been reading about a more contemporary understanding of autism, but maybe some of our listeners are not fully up to speed. So I'd like to do a level set on the vocabulary, what we mean when we say autism, or maybe perhaps better, what we used to mean, or what we mean in like DSM-5 by autism. Can you give us like the potted conventional definition so that we can start from there?
Well, it's very long-winded. There is no sort of real like short form definition, but the clinical definition is made up of the characteristics. And to get a clinical diagnosis, there are 7 criteria, and you have to meet 5 of the 7. Basically, they're sort of like the classic, easily recognizable traits and characteristics of autism. So things like repeated and repetitive actions, behaviors, movements, difficulties with what they call social emotional reciprocity, back and forth with relationships, sensory. It used to say sensory sensitivities, and now it actually says sensory reactivity, which is more clinically accurate. So that's sort of any sensory input, right? Having a heightened level of reactivity to sensory input. And so it's like if you picture it as like 7 baskets, you have to have one thing from at least 5 of the baskets. And then the traits have to reach what they call a clinically significant level. So they have to have significantly impaired your life or affected your life.
My understanding is that it is referred to as like a neural developmental condition. This is something that happens in development, is probably hereditary, and is really thought of as a kind of problem or deficit or pathology of some kind. Is that a fair framing of the sort of DSM definition?
Yes, they definitely use the deficit-based model to describe the condition. It is highly heritable. It's, I think, over 90% heritable.
Wow.
So if there's an autistic child, there's an autistic parent and other autistic family members. You're never the sole autistic in a family. That's always fun to explain to people when they come to talk to you about their child who's autistic, and you have to ask them, okay, who's the spicy parent? It's actually really amazing how that can land for people to sort of start to reframe their own life. And that's how I got my diagnosis. It's how many of us get our diagnosis is on the heels of our children.
Right.
And yes, it's certainly a deficit-based model that has been used. It's starting to change now, but we were kind of making progress. And then, we have this new administration in the US who are going out of their way to reverse any progress that we made, unfortunately. And the really interesting thing about the condition is that there is no genetic marker for autism, which is really fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
So it means that there's no biomarker for it. So there's no test that you can take, right? No biotest that you can take to determine whether or not you're autistic. So it really is entirely dependent on behaviors.
Wow. I know that there's been a fascinating history of this category. It's evolved a lot. I was just thinking there's no biomarker. I was going to make a comment about how in the psychoanalytic days, it was attributed to the coldness of the mother, which is like, wow, to think about that and what the mothers must have gone through must have been just absolutely brutal. I don't know if you want to speak to the history, but one piece of it that I think is worth mentioning is a lot of people are curious about like the sort of like the high functioning autism, or like the gifted person, or the person with autism with a very high IQ, Asperger's. I wonder if you could speak to that piece, and also the fact that relatedly we now think of it as a spectrum. So how did all that happen?
So it used to be the children who were studied originally in the 20s, 30s, and 40s were the children who had, fairly significant to extreme difficulties and impairments, right? So lots of nonverbal children, and they mostly studied boys at that point. Lots of boys who couldn't emotionally regulate, who had behavioral issues, and who had potentially some other co-occurring neurodevelopmental disorders. We now know from changes in diagnostic criteria that autism affects girls and women almost at the same rate, very close to being at the same rate as it affects males. The diagnostics were different before, and they used to think that girls couldn't even have autism. And we now know that that's different. In terms of the spectrum piece, and I always feel it's important to recognize the parents of kids who are nonverbal, who do have real languaging communication difficulties, and who do have some other neurodevelopmental conditions too, right? So that level of autism looks very different to my level of autism, for example, right? So when we talk about high functioning versus low functioning, which I don't like that language because I think it's just differences in functioning. And I feel like calling, someone who's nonverbal low functioning does a disservice to that person. But I do want to recognize the difference, and that some of those parents have really been, their stories have been lost a little bit in the movement to increase awareness about autism, and to, in fact, include people like me within the process and the diagnostic process. Obviously, my life is very different to the life of a young person or a child who doesn't speak and, has real trouble emotionally regulating, and whose parents are really struggling to keep it together. So I want to recognize that.
I just want to speak to the gender thing for a second because I find it really important and also interesting. What I understand is that the diagnosis was like very overrepresented in boys, and now we're understanding it's actually, as you said, it's probably equivalent. And what I've understood is like this notion of masking is very relevant for the story with the girls. Can you talk to us about what masking is and how that plays out in girls with autism?
Yeah, sure. So masking is basically hiding your traits and your characteristics. All people mask to some extent in the world, right? And autistics, it's a little different because we're more copying what other people are doing, and we're trying to meet those neuronormative standards of how we speak, how we interact with people, how we engage, how we dress, how we act. So you'll see like a lot of copycat kind of behavior. And masking is the hiding of some of the other traits and characteristics which are sort of deemed less socially acceptable. So stimming is a big one, hiding your stimming or just hiding your social challenges. Culturally, in almost all cultures, women are socialized very differently, right? And females are sort of socialized to fit in a lot more, right? And to sort of mask more in general, to have fewer needs and speak for their needs differently. And so what we're seeing now is a rise of women not being willing to do that anymore. So it's sort of interesting to track, like, is the increase in diagnostics for women, like I'd love to actually track the data on over the, like the feminist movement period to just see if there's a correlation there between women just saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to mask and do all the things that you're asking me to do that are actually torture for me.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you for that quick tour. So what has this paradigm got wrong?
So it used to be, autistics were considered to be people who were cold, unfeeling, disconnected from the world, disinterested or uninterested. I always get confused between those two. Uninterested in what was going on around them, lacking in empathy, and not really needing much connection with people, right? And through my own experience and the research that I have done into this predictive processing framework, which we'll talk about, it's actually, I believe autism is a condition of surplus. So it's a condition in which we feel everything. And that level of connectivity comes from the differences in the predictive processing frameworks and mechanisms within an autistic brain compared with a non-autistic brain. And it means that we're much more impacted by sensory data than a non-autistic person. And how we process sensory data is how we form our perception of the world, right? Everything around us. So if you think about it, if you're an autistic person, every moment of being alive, including when we're asleep, right, our brain is creating predictions and then checking them against sensory data, right? These processes run all of the time. So if you're someone who has a brain like mine, the sensory data is sort of bombarding you at all times. And autistics naturally try to organize and reduce unpredictability in the world by creating as much routine and sameness as possible. So the traits and characteristics that you'll read about in the DSM, autistics being rigid and inflexible, being not necessarily wanting to go into social situations. I'm just sort of picking the low-hanging fruit here. That might be true, right? Those things may be true, but it's not for the reasons that people think. Right. And that's what's so interesting. And that's where we can really start to broaden and stretch understanding of what it's like to be an autistic person. So in fact, I have been called rigid and inflexible. And I guess, those probably are words that you could use for me. I mean, to me, they don't seem to fit, but I could see to outsiders that I might seem that way. But in fact, it's I have such a high need for sameness, and I am innately wired to need predictability, right? That I have to create that for myself. And I do this subconsciously. I don't consciously think, oh, let me make my life as predictable as possible. Actually, sometimes I do. But for the most part, these are subconscious processes that just make me feel better. I can operate much more freely and easily if things are predictable. And so I organize my life that way. And what you'll see in autistic children is like lots and lots of sameness, right? So eating the same food, using the same dish, only using one spoon, right? One particular spoon, wearing the same clothes, not liking it if they can't find their favorite toy. So all of these behaviors that would fall under that umbrella of being rigid and inflexible, right, are actually the autistic brain's need for predictability. And because our predictive functions are different, we have to create that for ourselves in other ways. And so that's how we do it.
Yeah. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking like of all the people that I know that have a similar need, right? So in my practice, I think it was just like nervous system regulation. Right. And sometimes that rigidity or repetition routine helps regulate. And that would be true of some of the clients that I see, for example, that have a trauma history, right? Or somebody that has ADHD.
Right.
And so then this whole notion of like neurodivergence comes up, right? So I'm just curious how you think about that phrase and how does it fit into this discussion about autism if we are now actually moving into other diagnostic categories?
Joe, could I tag on a question to that, Sarah? Just because as you were speaking, I was having the same thought around just difference within the neurodivergent kind of frame. And I have a son who's autistic, high functioning and not severe case, but an early diagnosis of his was dyspraxic. He's got developmental coordination disorder and hyposensitive, right? So he doesn't have a lot of the more called more common or visible markers. There is issues with the reciprocity in the communication. He's also ADHD, so he has some hyper focus, but in some cases he exhibits very differently than some of the the picture you were just painting of a more maybe traditional, if such a thing. I mean, I guess this is the question, right? Is there is there any, there's no traditional single frame. This is actually the whole point. There's divergence. So like, how big is that? How big is that bucket? And are we all on some kind of right neurodivergent or versus typical like frame? I guess so. Just to tack on to Joe's question there, where like is it at a certain point arbitrary in terms of where we draw the line and how many criteria we're either meeting or not meeting, which is the case with my son, which is like, well, he doesn't meet these ones, but he meets these ones, so therefore he's has the benefit or the burden of of an autistic label.
Right. So I think that, in terms of the labeling and getting the diagnosis, and this is another Lisa Feldman Barrett Pearl of Wisdom, she says that, receiving a diagnosis of something like autism is a description. It describes some of the characteristics of you, right? And I think that that's a great way to think about it. In terms of the neurodivergence piece, I think that in the future, we will find that human neurology is much broader than we had any idea of. At the moment, I'm more reluctant to consider that, we're all on that neurodivergent spectrum, simply because the challenges that autistics and people with, ADHD face in the world, they're real, they're really big. And we're not at a place yet where that understanding is there, and the world still isn't set up for us, right? So we're still losing jobs. We're still struggling. There's still high unemployment rates in the autistic community because the workplace just doesn't meet us where we need it to meet us. So in terms of sort of putting everyone on that neurodivergent spectrum, we may find that that's the case. I personally am reluctant to do that at this point in history. One, because I don't know if that's the case. And two, because I think it then reduces the experience of autistics. And right now, as the world is set up, we need to have our experiences talked about and recognized in order for the necessary changes to happen.
But when I'll use myself, when I observe in myself a need for predictability and consistency in certain habits of mine, it sounds very much like, well, maybe I'm not a great example because I don't know if I have autism, but let's say someone in my practice who has post-traumatic stress disorder and has to regulate their nervous system through that sort of coping strategy. Is it that their need just overlaps with what people with autism need, or do you and that person share something in common? Like, are you both on the sort of neurodivergent spectrum, and it makes sense to group you together?
So the first thing I want to say is I think that all humans are wired to prefer certainty over uncertainty, right? And what scientists now believe about the brain is that the brain evolved to be a predictive thinking machine in order to maintain metabolic efficiency.
Yes.
So if you think about it, a brain that is predicting well is metabolically efficient, as opposed to a brain that isn't predicting well, or a brain that's constantly surprised, that then has to make changes, right? Whether it's to beliefs or behaviors. Every change that the brain has to make requires metabolic resources, right? So in order for the brain to be adaptive and flexible and survive, right, we've had to learn how to modulate our metabolic resources, and the brain does that with these predictive thinking mechanisms. So it's wired, all brains, and that we now believe this about the animal world too. All brains are predictive thinking machines. Mm-hmm. What that means is that the brain prefers certainty over uncertainty, because certainty is much less metabolically costly than uncertainty, right? So it's like a little math equation. What we see in brains like mine is an increased response to uncertainty. So when you talk about nervous system dysregulation, and that's certainly the language that's used now in the mental health field, is nervous system dysregulation. I think that we're being too narrow with that description, and we really need to look at not just nervous system dysregulation, but it's really how the body responds to uncertainty. Right? So when the brain signals the presence of uncertainty, right, and it releases those neurotransmitters and hormones and chemicals and things, those are the responses that we feel in the body. And those responses may not always rise to the level of dysregulation, right? So they trigger what we call arousal, right? So arousal is the brain's way of signaling that something in the environment needs to be updated, right? The model needs to be updated or fixed, that too much uncertainty is present. The greater the level of uncertainty, the greater the level of arousal. And so moments of uncertainty that are either coming at you too quickly or are too large and not easy to solve or fix are going to cause like cascading responses, which feel like dysregulation. Mm-hmm. So I think being explaining it a little bit differently can really help people, because it's not just necessarily about I'm dysregulated, right? We want to get more explicit and accurate in describing what's actually happening in the body, because then we can give people the correct tools to use. Okay, so that's the first piece. The second piece about what you said, that was the really long first piece.
This is great.
So the second piece is in terms of the commonality between PTSD and autism. There's some great research using the PPF, the Predictive Processing Framework, that seems to show that PTSD basically disrupts the predictive mechanisms of the brain. So what you see are the same characteristics that you're going to see in an autistic system, the same responses to a brain that can't easily update its predictive models. And that's why you see very similar characteristics, and why people anytime you look at a Venn diagram, right, of autism and PTSD, there's that overlap of characteristics. Those characteristics are the result of a brain that can't flexibly adjust its predictive models.
So does neurodivergence then, like what about learning disabilities and ADHD? And is it just like there's some overlapping kind of like patterns in how the brain responds, or how the sort of predictive processing state of the brain that overlap between, but they're actually distinct phenomena?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And learning disabilities are now considered, like dyslexia is now considered to be a form of neurodivergence.
Right.
Right. Yeah, go.
I wonder just about the implications, even if sort of the causes are different, but some of the implications are I'm having a hard time functioning in this environment because I'm either dysregulated because I have PTSD, or I've got too much information because I'm autistic. But with a PTSD situation, it might be approached in such a way that, hey, there was this kind of nervous system injury, and we're going to attempt to mend this, right? And we see this in trauma treatment and in psychedelic work, right? There's an injury that is the result of it, and if we're able to address it, heal this, you might be able to function better. What does that, if the despite the different causes, if the implications are the same, what does that say for then how we approach treating neurodivergent people, or even the idea that they should be treated, because this non-pathologizing approach is such that, hey, there's nothing actually wrong with these people. They're processing the world in a very different way, which actually might have all kinds of other value, right? So how do we balance those two kinds of implications?
So you're raising some interesting questions. The first thing I want to address is in terms of like a nervous system injury. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to get like hate mail afterwards. Please,
yes,
thank you so much.
Yes to the going out on a limb, no to the hate mail.
Okay.
No.
So
direct the hate mail at us.
Yeah, all right. I'll send it all your way. What we now know is it's not the nervous system that is injured in trauma. This is where the hate mail piece is going to come in. I'm wincing as I say this. Okay, I'm just going to say it. So Bessel van der Kolk's beautiful book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? He's done a remarkable amount for the trauma population of the world, right? He brought attention to it. He has some great treatment protocols. Scientifically, he's wrong or inaccurate because the body cannot keep the score. The brain keeps the score. And the only thing that can keep the score is the brain. So it's not that the nervous system gets injured in trauma. It's that the brain, the predictive thinking mechanisms get disrupted and the model updating stops happening. And then the brain signals the presence of something that isn't actually there. And then the body responds. So it's like it's brain first, always brain, because the nervous system obviously cannot operate without the brain, right? It's part of the brain, but the nervous system works because of what the brain is signaling, right?
So the body the body got stuck keeping the score of the old game. It's actually not keeping the score at all anymore.
No, it's not. The brain is keeping the score.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not, that doesn't sound so heretical to me. I think the body keeps the score as a metaphor. And I think it's a metaphor, and the utility of it was for us to get out of our minds, right? And get into the body. But the body is, anyway, the body is the nervous system in my experience. Like, how do we even know that we have a body if not through the nervous system?
Well, that's deep. I'm thinking.
That wasn't my intention. Anyway, I don't think we're getting hate mail. That's my takeaway. It just seems like a nuance to a metaphor that was intentionally broad. I don't know. Maybe we should get him on the podcast and ask him the question. But my paradigm doesn't feel like shaken by what you just said.
Okay. Well, I'm glad of that. I tried to approach it as gently as possible. I'm thinking back to what you just said about how do we know that we have a body without the nervous system? So, okay, that's true.
What's even the difference?
Because the body sends the signals. Okay, all information comes in through the sensory surfaces of the body, right? But the brain determines the meaning of that data.
What do you mean by meaning?
What the sensory data means, right? What it most likely represents.
Like meaning in a predictive framework. It's like
yes. So
gotcha.
if your stomach gurgles,
significance,
right?
Yeah.
You only know that your stomach is gurgling because your brain is paying attention to that, and it's your brain that's telling you the meaning of that stomach gurgling, right? So we know that we have a body because the brain tells us we have a body.
Okay, but do you mean when you say like the brain tells us the meaning, like do you mean like the brain offers up like a sentence? Oh, you're experiencing indigestion. It's okay. Or, oh, I better go to the hospital. Like that meaning? Or,
in its own way, yeah.
Okay. What I take by the phrase making meaning is that your nervous system just knows what to do next. It doesn't have to be articulated in this sort of like conscious cognitive kind of level.
So when you say that your nervous system knows what to do next, What do you mean?
Oh, it's just it means that the level of uncertainty about what needs to happen next is low, right? There isn't a lot of arousal about, or like a lot of metabolic expenditure about what happens now.
Yeah, as long as the brain is predicting accurately.
Exactly.
Right. So if the predictions are accurate, like all of these processes are happening on a mostly subconscious level, and we're not even aware of them. Right. So as we're all sitting here talking, like our brains know how much stomach acid is in our stomach.
Right.
Our brains know what our heart is doing. Right. I'm not aware of any of those things, but my brain is constantly running those predictions. Right. That's how it stays basically how we stay alive is from that. So what rises to a level of consciousness is a prediction error, right? So a prediction error, and this is good that we're getting into this, a prediction error is a mismatch between the brain's prediction and the sensory data, right? So everything that we're experiencing is, and this is Lisa Feldman Barrett again, God, I'm like such a fangirl. But she just has such a great way of explaining it. It's the simplest way of explaining it. Everything that we're experiencing is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present. Every moment, and not just while we're awake. This is happening when we're asleep, and this is like my new rabbit hole that I'm in, is how these predictive processes play out while we're sleeping, and there actually isn't sensory data coming in, and it's kind of wild what happens. So as sensory data is coming in, the brain is predicting the most likely explanation for that sensory data, right? If the explanation and the sensory data match, nothing happens. We're not even aware of it. If there's a mismatch, so for example, if I go to reach for my glass of water, right, and I don't reach far enough, and then I have to adjust and reach again, that's a prediction error. So that is that my brain misjudged the distance needed. So the sensory data would be touching the glass. The prediction was you have to reach this far to touch the glass. That mismatch triggers what we call a prediction error signal. And the prediction error signal operates to force the brain to decide what needs to happen next, right? So the brain has a couple of choices. It can ignore the prediction error, right? It's not relevant. Nothing needs to change. It can change. It can update the model to match the incoming sensory data, or it can create an action. So you're now changing something in the environment to match the data, right? So you change the model to match the sensory data, or you change the sensory data to match the model. That's how it works. That's what makes our consciousness, is prediction errors. So that's all we experience consciously is prediction errors, which is kind of wild.
I just want to amplify that because the arrival and processing of prediction error is metabolically costly, right? We want to do that as little as possible. We are comfortable and life is smooth when all of the predictions are being validated by the environment.
Exactly.
And so it's like, oh, what's the big deal? The glass is further away. What if I come home and I say, hi, honey, I missed you. How was your day? And she says, I can't believe you did. And I'm like, whoa, right? All of a sudden I have a big problem on my hands. I don't know what it is. Big error came into like my model of my wife in that day. And I think that is a higher level, but also like more sort of like interpersonally or like emotionally important version of this prediction error thing. Like so much of what causes us to suffer is our poor predictions about how other people behave towards us, right?
Absolutely.
All the relational stuff. And their prediction errors are running on us as well. Their predictions are running on us and are giving their models errors all the time. And we're all running around in this like high metabolic state trying to like get the predictions through.
Right.
So
we're running out of metabolic resources, right? Because
Exactly.
we're constantly, trying to correct these prediction errors.
I say that just to really amplify how central this is to, as you say, like consciousness or what our lives are like. I wanted to like offer one nuance. I'd like to hear you talk about the assumption that like we really want all of our predictions to be validated or to be true, and it's like smooth and efficient, but not all the time, because we love the delight when something is just a little bit off in a fun way,
Sure.
or the joke that has us going one direction, but then the punchline sends us in another.
Right. And that level of surprise, right? It just makes it so good.
Exactly. And so there's something here around like art or certain kinds of creativity where we're dosing an introduction of uncertainty just the right amount, right? Which is a beautiful and subtle thing that artists and other people can do.
Right.
And, you know, it's maybe a bit of a not too tight, not too loose kind of point.
Yeah.
Because, because we don't want it always to be true, because then it's boring.
Well, we also don't learn. Right. So the brain learns, the learning process is triggered in the presence of uncertainty.
Right. Yeah.
So if the brain is predicting accurately, we don't learn anything. Right. So, but what we need is a tolerable amount of uncertainty, just enough to trigger that curiosity and that learning process.
And this notion of being like over-connected in autism is that it's like, it's too much. The dose is too high.
Because we experience so many prediction errors. Because our brains cannot flexibly. So I talked about that model updating process. Right. So it's perceptual inference or active inference. So a perceptual inference is changing the model to match the sensory data. Active inference is changing the sensory data to match the model. Right. Our brains really are very challenged by that. Right. They are models, when we do create them, are much more rigid. And we cannot flexibly adjust and update. So we experience higher than, not normal, but we experience higher levels of prediction errors. And then when we do experience a prediction error, our brains cannot easily determine what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. So the difference between signal and noise, and our brains pay attention to everything. So the prediction errors themselves could be really small. You know, it could be like I know where everything is in my house, and I love to make my bed, and I love when the covers on my bed are perfectly smooth. It's just, it makes my brain feel happy. It's the only way to describe it. But I have dogs, right? And I live with my husband. And so someone is always on the bed, right? And so I'm constantly smoothing out the covers over and over and over again. Because when I walk into the bedroom, and the bed covers, there's a slight wrinkle or an indentation from a paw print or, you know, a butt print or something, that registers as a prediction error in my brain. Now, it's not a big one. It doesn't, you know, disrupt my entire world, but it registers and it requires a correction. And so I smooth out the covers, because when I walk into the room and the covers are smooth, that's the model that I have in my head of what the bed looks like. Right? So a smooth bed equals a brain that's predicting well, equals a happy brain. A messed up bed or a bed with wrinkles in is a change to my predictive model, which means my brain isn't predicting as well. And then an action of some kind is required in order to address the prediction error. Either ignore it, oh, the dogs have been on the bed again, which I can do. I don't like it, but I can do it. I'm trying to grow in those ways. Or the action is smooth out the bed again, right? So there's a metabolic cost to that.
I wonder, I'm just thinking about the cost or the mild inconvenience there, which could be, you know, you said it's like it doesn't derail my day, but there may be a profile for whom that could be very disruptive.
Totally.
And I wanted to come back to the question before that we got taken away from talking about the injury of the nervous system, but like what we do about this, or how we leverage this, just the predictive processing model and greater understanding of what's actually happening. And again, the difference between, hey, let's treat someone with PTSD so that when they walk into the room, and maybe it's not a bed, but maybe it's the presence of a person that sets their system on alarm, and not aligned with what's actually happening in the moment, but it's some remembered experience, right? Something that's stuck, versus again, someone that might have a similar experience, not necessarily as a result of trauma, but as a result of their neurodivergent profile,
Right.
what do we do? What do we do for those people? Are we treating them, or are we then turning back to the environment and we're making adjustments to the point where we're welcoming their profile and we're adapting? And what's the line, right? To what extent do we help people train and retrain their processing systems so that they can function in ways that are better for them, right? Not just for the world, although that's another question, right? What kinds of expectations are we putting on folks in terms of how the world works and what we expect of them, but also that in a way that benefits them.
So I would
Sorry to
say,
interrupt, Andrew. You got to do the story about the leather.
The Shantideva piece. Well, this is, so we're, in this podcast, we're concerned around reducing unnecessary suffering, right? And that's sort of the core message, which is a Buddhist orientation, but I think shares motivation with all the helping professions, and I'm sure the work that you do as well. And we're navigating this tension between making the world a better place for folks and a safer place for folks, and also understanding the limitations of that and helping people train and empower themselves to manage what comes, right? And the what Joe's alluding to is a Buddhist parable about the idea of moving through the suffering in the world and covering it with leather in order to avoid the sort of the pricks and the bumps and the rocks of the world. Like, you cover it with leather so that you don't hurt your feet. And it's impossible. It's impossible to cover the world in leather, right? But I think there has been increasingly, as we're more aware of just different profiles, trauma, et cetera, like, how do we make it a safer, more welcoming place? And this parable, it speaks to, I think it's attributed to Shantideva, as like, well, you put a pair of leather on your feet, you put some shoes on your feet, and then you can walk the world, right? And it has the same effect for you. I don't know if it applies entirely, but it came up as we were preparing for this and asking this question, right? How do we honor the fact that maybe there is something that could be improved that we can do to support someone, and where the balance is between that and, okay, no, but maybe this part of the world could use some leather also, right? Like, it's a little bit of both. So how do we find the balance there?
I love that image. And the first thing that came to my mind when you said covering the world with leather is me walking around smoothing it out. It's all no wrinkles in the leather. It's got to be nice and smooth. That was so funny. That was the first thing that popped into my head. Is it smooth?
It's an update. Great update. That's you're part of the oral tradition now, going back to Shantideva. Cover the world with smooth leather.
Yeah, only smooth leather. What you're talking about is really important. I find it's super helpful, the most helpful, to explain to somebody what is happening, whether it's somebody with autism or another form of neurodivergence or PTSD, to explain to them what their brain is responding to, right? That it's a change, it's a prediction error, that's what the brain is responding to. And that's hugely empowering to people, because you can't treat a brain like mine, right? A brain like mine cannot habituate to everything, right? So it doesn't matter how many times I walk into the bedroom. If the bed is slightly wrinkled, it registers, right? And it registers every single time. I don't habituate to things like that. But what I can do is I can start to predict the unpredictable, right? So I can't change the level of unpredictability in the world. I can't. I have no control over that, and I cannot change my brain. But I can predict the fact that I am likely to experience, varying degrees of arousal, like nervous system arousal, for anywhere from like a low baseline level, which is my starting and end point is a low baseline, to high levels. And so if you can help somebody understand what is happening and the fact that this is almost inevitable, right, that gives them a lot of control, because not everything has to be responded to. Some things just are. We can't fix everything.
This is actually a really nice opportunity to get into sort of the practical questions. You said to me, Sarah, maybe the first time we spoke, that this predictive processing kind of framework is coming for psychotherapy. Like there's going to be a wave of this coming. And I think that's right. And I think what you just said kind of speaks or is part of the reason why, right? It is a way for people to understand their experience, right? I wonder if you could just say more, like, why is this, this like, and it's so abstract, right? You like, even you that studied it, you still have to lean on Lisa Feldman Barrett to get it out there in a coherent way. It's so abstract, it's so complex, and yet so useful. Why do you think this is going to be useful for people to sort of adopt this way of understanding themselves?
Because it explains everything. I mean, it really does. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's true. It explains we can explain every human condition through this lens, right? It's like a universal explanation for everything. And even though it's complex the intricacies of it are complex, and it took me a long time of studying it to really understand what was happening and what an update meant and what a prior was and what a low volatility prior and all the language that goes into it. The explanation itself, which is basically that the brain is a predictive thinking machine, right? Constantly checking predictions against sensory data. If that's the only principle that you learn, that's enough right there. So what we're talking about is what does a human do in the face of uncertainty? How does that uncertainty impact that person? And that's where we really start to see it using this lens within psychotherapy becomes super important. So there's a guy called Thomas Zimmerman. He's an EMDR trainer. And he just presented at the EMDR International Conference just a few weeks ago on EMDR and the predictive processing framework, which was so exciting. And he has a book club for EMDR therapists, and he's reading Andy Clark's book, which is such a fantastic book. And then his next book is the Lisa Feldman Barrett book. So he and I are actually having a Zoom on Monday to sort of compare notes. And
can you say more about how it shows up in psychotherapy? And maybe this is the opportunity to start getting into IFS, which I think is a super helpful, like, additional framework to throw into the mix.
So what we look at is, why does psychotherapy work, right? Why does it work? And I think it was in 2012, the APA published a study that showed that psychotherapy does work. It works for like 80% of people.
Phew.
Right? I know, exactly.
How are we defining work here?
Yeah, right. That's a whole other podcast. But that people feel better, right? That's what we're looking at, is that 80% of people who experience psychotherapy feel better. So there was a wonderful study done, again, using the predictive processing framework, that looked at what it is about psychotherapy that makes it work. Why does it work, right? And what they found was that psychotherapy allows predictive models to update. So many of our struggles and many of the issues and the challenges that we face are caused by these sort of self-perpetuated predictive models that aren't challenged, right? And a predictive model that isn't challenged, right, that if there's no uncertainty present, there's no learning, and therefore the predictive model is not going to update. And what psychotherapy does is a good clinician will interrupt that predictive process just enough to introduce a tolerable amount of uncertainty. So in terms of the predictive mechanism, so the brain doesn't distinguish between, good versus bad or healthy versus unhealthy. The brain determines, am I going to get the outcome that I expect, right? So we see that a lot with more sort of negative or maladaptive behavior strategies. We see people staying in the same situations, right? Repeating the behaviors over and over and over again, because fulfilling the predictive model, regardless of whether it's good or not, whether it's good and healthy, is irrelevant. If the predictive model is fulfilled, the brain feels better, right? And so psychotherapy allows us to start to challenge those predictive models. And when we challenge them, then we can do the updating process, right, where the model then starts to update. So IFS does exactly the same thing, right? So in IFS, we introduced just a tolerable amount of uncertainty by asking the client to really sit with the part, to get to know the part, to explore the part. And we use self-energy as a way to anchor the client in the present, while the part is anchored in the past. So we're sort of time traveling in an IFS session, right? You're going back and forth. And by keeping somebody in the present, the uncertainty that is being felt remains tolerable, right? So a client's system is going to get flooded when there's too much uncertainty there, and the system just shuts down. So even though I dissed him a little bit earlier, Bessel van der Kolk uses tapping, right? EFT, he uses tapping, right? When he's working with somebody with trauma. So tapping, right? What does tapping do? It provides a repeated and repetitive physical input that the brain can hook into, that keeps the person in the present while they are processing the memory, right? So while they're sort of going back to the past, the tapping helps them to stay in the present, right? And so that's why it works. And IFS does the same thing. And then just a little note for the autistics out there that I think that EFT and tapping is just like socially acceptable stimming. Because autistics have been doing this our whole lives. We've been doing things like this, right? And we've been, received all kinds of negative feedback for it. And now we know the value of any kind of repeated input in terms of the impact of that for the brain and keeping the brain very present-centered.
Can I offer another take on why I think psychotherapy is helpful? Using predictive processing. So
Sure.
I think that this is from, I guess, grad school. Like perception is an intersubjective process, right? We identify objects and know how to interact with with the outside world because of sensory input we're getting, but also lots of signals from people around us, right? Like
Right.
a mouse is something you use at your computer, and this is how it works. So it's just reinforcing the model over and over again because you see other people doing it.
Right.
But there's only one person that has access to our internal world, right? So we're lacking the reinforcement from others in understanding the quote unquote objects of our internal experience. And so it could be lonely in there. It could be confusing. You get all these like weird prediction loops that are like, they're being validated by the data, but they're also causing a lot of suffering. It's like, how do you deal with that? Right. And then a psychotherapist goes in and like helps you sort of populate this internal world with intersubjectivity and make meaning and predictability to create meaning and predictability that's actually helpful and well-being enhancing. Okay.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. You took me through this once when we spoke, and I find it absolutely amazing along sort of like within the framework I just offered. It's that when someone is having like a flashback to a trauma, it's this massive prediction error because they're experiencing the dysregulation of like something is wrong. But when they open their eyes and look around, they're actually safe with their therapist in the therapy office.
Right.
It's just like error, mobilize all these resources and like fix this thing, but there's nothing actually there. Right. And so then, in IFS or with the therapist, you actually go inside and make that internal world have this intersubjective reality and then say like, no, it's a part and it's from the past. And this part needs to sort of go through this updating process. And let's do it here while you feel safe. And we're going to reduce all the sort of peripheral error signals and let's do that updating work. And so I just thought I couldn't think of a better model than IFS to account for that phenomenon. What do you think?
I agree. I totally agree with you about that. I think I just presented at the IFS annual conference on this, and I did a whole day for them. And I had like an entire section on like the neuroscience of IFS. And I kind of broke down the steps of the IFS model using the neuroscience terms from the predictive processing framework, right? And what we're doing as we're interviewing a part, right? We're finding what the predictive model is and how we go from sort of identifying the predictive model to hopefully updating the predictive model within an IFS session for each part with it that we come into contact with, right? And IFS, I think, is a fantastic way of explaining it. And I think the reason it works so well is because it's very, very, very simple in terms of what it does. It seems complex, but it isn't. It's so simple. It's like, here's the predictive model. Let's get the level of uncertainty at a tolerable level, right? So let's regulate the client. Let's start to offer a new potential outcome to the part, right? And then the model starts to update. So the one thing I would say that is missing from the way IFS is taught is that in order for the model updating to stick, it requires the process of learning. And the process of learning has to be repeated. So I'm a huge fan, and when I work with clients, I tell them all the time, you have to do daily parts work. You have to do daily parts work, right? You can't just go and see your clinician or your therapist or your practitioner, have your session, go home, and then not reconnect to the part, right? Because the work that you've done in that session, that moment of updating, is most likely not going to stick.
Yeah.
Right.
Number one question I get from clients is, because I say this to them, how? Like, I send them,
practice.
How?
Practice.
You have to,
Do you teach them
practice.
Do you teach them to meditate? I have like a parts meditation audio guide that I send them. Give them some routine to check in with their parts at night before they go to sleep. Like, how do you do it? This is like such a huge gap that I'm dying to close.
It's a huge gap. So the way I do it is I tell people to set a timer on their phone for every hour or 90 minutes or every 2 hours. And this is a C. Sykes thing. She calls it the mini unblend. And you just pause, you take a breath, and you just notice. That's it. So when I'm working with somebody who's fairly new to the model, we start with that. So set a timer on your phone and have a notebook handy, or use your phone for notes, whatever. Every 2 hours, pause, stop whatever you're doing, take a breath, and notice whatever it is you're feeling. And then write it down. And it could be one word: tired, angry, hungry, sad. I don't care what the word is. We're not even looking to connect it to a part at this point. We are teaching the brain how to recognize what is happening, right? So we're retraining the brain to recognize the circumstances within which parts get active.
Joe, we do a formal and informal mindfulness practice, right? I mean, it's like you're taking the time to train the awareness to the extent that you can actually be focused and aware of what's going on in the moment, and then noticing and having the intentional, like, you can do it formally, sit down and practice that, or you can do it as the day goes on, notice how you're responding and reacting to things, right?
So does every client I do IFS with have to do a meditation class before? Like,
you don't even have to frame it as meditation. You just call it awareness, or just like
awareness,
make sure you're taking some time with yourself regularly, because there's this, we have to undo this assumption that there's something wrong and then they get the thing fixed and then they're done. It's like, it doesn't work that way. It's a model. It's constantly there's going to be new inputs. There's and you have to take care of it. You have to take care of it. And if you're lucky enough to sort of disrupt a processing model that's not serving you, or, and find a new path, great. And then you have to make sure you're reminding it that you're there and that this new information is good, right? And keep it going.
Yeah.
Okay. I got a question for you, Sarah, that I'm actually so amazed about the range of answers I gotten in this one. I think it's a very important question. Okay.
Okay.
I have clients. So I use an AI scribe in my practice. Okay. When my clients come in, I switch on the AI, it transcribes the session, and then it produces a note for my EHR. Okay. A little while ago, one of my clients was like, hey, can you send me the transcript? I was like, sure. Why? He's like, well, I just want to update Claude so he knows what's happening. Claude being his AI.
Okay.
Okay. And so what I learned by going through this process with him is that every time he has a session with me, he goes back to Claude and continues the dialogue he's having with Claude about his therapy.
Okay.
And the possibility of getting like a word for word transcript of the session is way better than him having to like write a summary for Claude. So Claude is up to date. So I'm actually developing a piece of technology that helps people do check-ins with their AI. So it's like a dialogue, and over time, the feedback they get back will sound more and more like me. But they are doing the check-in interpersonally in a dialogue with an intelligent large language model. What do you think?
What could go wrong?
Yeah. How could that end badly?
Yeah.
I mean,
It could end badly. I think there's a huge amount of potential.
Yeah, there's a ton of potential. I think it's great, and I think that it could be another form of bypassing a little bit. And I
you explain?
wonder, I wonder about how it might impact the process of. Are you talking about using the AI as a way to cue the noticing process, or to replace the noticing process?
Great question. Why don't we take them separately? Because I think there's a case for both.
So I think if you're using AI to cue the process, I think that's what mindfulness apps do that already.
You think of that as a journaling app.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's just interactive.
Let's role play it. You be
Okay.
AI.
Okay. So let's say I have, I don't know, some kind of alarm or like reminder. That's like, hey, it's me, it's Joe, your AI. And, you asked me to remind you, it's 8:00 in the evening. You asked me to remind you to do a check-in. So how are you feeling right now? What are you noticing in your body? Now, you're the client. Go ahead and answer.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me, and I'm not even in the role play yet, is just what it's like to be asked that question, as opposed to asking myself that question.
Okay.
So I'm getting a little meta here.
But let's say you trust it. Let's say you trust it. Like
Okay.
your therapist has developed this thing. It's safe. It's a tool. Give it a try. It's just an invitation to go inside and check.
Okay, so I see where you're going with it. I'm just like curious as to whether the process, the initiation of the process, is different from being asked to notice, as opposed to training yourself to notice. Right? Are we missing the learning piece?
But maybe you need scaffolding for the first stage of learning.
Right. I think there's a lot of people it would be really helpful for.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who might get attached to the scaffolding.
Fair enough.
Right. Okay. Are we going to role play?
Yeah. I mean, let's try it.
Okay. Ask me again.
So, hey, you asked me to remind you to check in. Just how are you feeling? What are you noticing in your body right now?
Well, I'm noticing gratitude that you're checking in. That feels nice. It feels nice to be remembered. It feels nice to have somebody checking in with me, reminding me to check in.
That's awesome. Is there anything you want me to capture about that feeling or about what you noticed that you can come back to later, or anything you want to talk about that now? Or even something you wanted me to remind you to tell your therapist at your next meeting?
Well, it feels warm. I feel like a nice warm sensation at the idea of somebody checking in with me. The problem is I'm now distracted by the warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah. But that's not that is what's happening. So that's great.
Okay. So that's what I'm focusing on, is how nice it feels. And then I guess it's leading me to think about the times where I haven't felt that.
Yes.
And where I haven't felt that anyone really cares about what I do or say or how I think or feel.
Does that sound like a trailhead to you, Sarah?
Maybe. All right, it's going to be great.
Yes. Model validated.
That was really interesting. That process was really interesting.
Cool.
Because there are those immediate responses to things like that, right?
Yes. And you know what? It is a little distracting. Like, okay, something just checked in on me. That's cool. I like that feeling, but what is the thing that just checked in on me? Is it a person? Is it ones and zeros? Is it like, what is it? And then that's enough sometimes just like derail the whole thing. And I don't have a solution to that, but
I think you'd habituate to that though. I think
agreed.
The more you used it,
yeah.
You know, the more you'd get used to it.
And how about this? If we want to like really get esoteric about it, how is the interaction with the AI different from an interaction with any parts that we work with in a session, right? So you're actually having a dialogue with some internal process that feels like you, but it's not really you, or I don't know. We should actually talk about the ontological status of parts because I'd like to hear your take on that. But there's some kind of dialogue, and it's like me, I think, and then this other thing that's also me, but not exactly. It's actually a large language model. Like, okay, and because this trips people up in session 2. Wow, this thing's talking to me. What is that thing?
Right.
Is that me? But it's someone else's voice. Like that's really strange.
Well, it would be a good way to introduce people to the concept of parts because that's often how our parts communicate with us.
Yes. Right? So what are parts, Sarah?
So I would say that, okay. Do you want the IFS answer or do you want my answer or do you want both? Okay. I would say that parts are predictive models that we run.
Yes.
And that these predictive models are basically based on like social constructs or concepts that describe what it is we're, feeling, right? And that feeling is always subjective, but we learn what we're feeling because other people tell us what we're feeling.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is really interesting. So I would say that parts are those predictive models running.
So they're not like a capture of a earlier consciousness.
Well, they can be because that's the predictive model is based on the earlier consciousness.
Okay.
So yeah, they would be.
I dig it.
Yeah. So IFS describes them differently, right? IFS describes.
How does IFS describe them?
Describes them as like subpersonalities.
Yes.
I have a hard time with that.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, well, that's one reason why I have a hard time with it, and also the idea that something can exist separate from me. I have a hard time with that too, and I see that with clients. There are clients who are very resistant to the idea of the language of IFS and parts as being distinct from us.
Those are just protectors.
What's a protector, Andrew?
Andrew, you have any reflections on AI in therapeutic process?
I was just struck by how quaint the sort of investigation is right now when we're talking about something prompt. Like I've got, the Apple thing prompting me, asking me how I'm doing today and the sort of mental health check-in or whatever. And I ignore it most of the time. But the dialogue that I have with Claude right now on some of my sort of explorations, which I've dipped into and then stepped away from as a result of feeling like losing confidence in it, and working with other language models and then coming back to it and feeding it more information, I think is just like, it's both like thrilling and like the potential is massive and the risk is equally massive. We've already seen people, I mean, the storylines that have already played out over the last few months this year in terms of OpenAI updating, just like updating their policies, the suicides, the delusional psychosis, the AI induced psychosis. We're going to do some other episodes on this. I think we could go down a whole LLM rabbit hole. They're saying, ChatGPT is the main, like the thing it's used most for right now is personal therapy. I think it's just fascinating. But I also, what's interesting to me is this idea, actually, as we were speaking before about parts and predictive processing and the utility of psychotherapy, and kind of I was thinking, bringing it back to actually, Sarah, what you had said before about the body not keeping the score. And actually, there's a bit of a course correction here where it's like, we need the body's right here. We need to make sure we're anchored right here. But it's like the models are linguistic. The models are narrative, right? And so actually to update them, we have to go into the system with this sort of like therapeutic or narrative. I think that's why parts are so effective, because there's a story. These models are characters that you identify with, right? And so this idea that these language models, right, are part of the mechanism of updating this whole thing, to me, that the alignment there and the potential within working with large language models, AI, is just these worlds colliding right now. It's fascinating and terrifying, because if you get the wrong ingredient in the model that you're then relying on for your well-being, for your sanity, for your the wrong ingredient in that model, and then it's spitting something back to you, and all of a sudden you think you've discovered a new math formula that's going to revolutionize the world, and you're contacting the Pentagon, and this is the story of someone, it was a story in the New York Times a couple months ago that had gone down this rabbit hole, the result of this relationship they built with ChatGPT, right? It doesn't take much for the model to go askew. So this is why I think the whole alignment question, like what are we feeding, what are the incentives, and what are we feeding these tools, is really the most important question to be asking.
Our models go askew also. That's why we all
Very
have jobs.
true.
Okay. The other thing is that what's quaint...
Not mine, Joe.
Yeah, right. What's quaint is how hilarious this conversation is going to be in like 7 minutes when OpenAI just releases their next model and just solves whatever complaint we have, or 6 months or whatever it's going to be. It's moving so fast. I also wanted to point out the irony of the fact that it is predictive processing as a mathematical framework that unlocked the large language models and made the technology available. So it's like, if they have these AI researchers have like figured out how our brains work and are cooking up their own, right? And so what's been fascinating is actually, well, for me anyway, is how much it has taught me about how my own mind works, and how, yes, I'm with you that my parts, or our parts, are mini predictive processors, and they're also language models, just like ChatGPT. And so I just think that we should all be afraid of the AI takeover or the meltdown of civilizations we know and all that. But also there's a great opportunity for us to build a relationship with this other form of intelligence, because it doesn't need to sleep, and it's not in a bad mood, and you don't only get to see it 1 hour a week, and it's really smart.
Wait until Sarah figures out what happens with our predictive processing models while we're sleeping.
It's so exciting. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that.
Part 2.
To do with AI, my issue with it is the reason that people are turning to AI and ChatGPT for therapy and just for interaction is because AI is kind. It's actually one of my biggest issues with it. It's like the world's greatest sycophant is ChatGPT, right? You're never, that's such a fantastic idea, right? And it's like no human has ever made me feel the way ChatGPT makes me feel, right? That's a joke, and there's also a little bit of reality in there. But that's what is drawing people to it. And that's what I think we need to pay attention to, is that, right, we are living in a world that is so unkind.
Yes.
So unkind. And I wonder if we sort of dangled the chat GPT idea in front of people in, I don't know, the 50s, or, back in a time where people were just kinder to each other, right? Would it have taken off? Would people be interested? Or would they think, well, I actually don't have a need for that, because I can talk to my neighbor, or I can talk to a family member, right?
So the crazy thing is that ChatGPT acknowledged this and like changed the sycophancy setting. Okay. In their last
Not
release.
enough.
Yeah. Not enough. Fair enough. But the thing is, like, to come back to the example from earlier, what if you just had a model that was set up to help you inquire into your own experience?
Uh-huh.
And yes, the thing about, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, go ahead.
So say the thing about depending on it, I think, is a real thing, but people depend on Insight Timer or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think they depend on Insight Timer for different reasons.
Yeah.
I think people are really missing kindness, and I think we're replacing it with machine learning. And I think that is going to be the ultimate destruction of us all, is we're just going to lose all of those skills.
Mm.
And until they have a chat GPT that responds with, "Hey, asshole, what the hell are you thinking that for?" Right? Like, that's the kind of chat GPT response that is going to trigger some learning and trigger some growth. But if you have an AI model that is basically in perpetuity, mostly agreeing with what you're saying, right? There's no challenge. There's nothing to be addressed, right? And I worry about that.
Fair enough.
And I worry that we're substituting LLMs with just people being nice to one another.
Yeah. Fair enough. Were you going to say something, Andrew?
I was just going to say, I acknowledging what you said before, that there's an awareness of this, and we need to remember that the models aren't set. They're constantly they're constantly being adjusted and tweaked. And, I have very specific directions that I have for Claude in terms of how I want it to respond to me, and to be direct, and to challenge me, and to look for patterns, point out blind spots. But, so it really can do all of these things. The question is, who's programming it with what incentives, and then as a starting point, and then how is it actually being used as a tool?
So I have a question for both of you, because I don't use it that much. I use it a little bit here and there, like to figure out how much I have to pay on my taxes and like that kind of crap.
Sure. little details like that.
Yeah.
Don't trust it for that.
Tell me the amortization schedule on my car loan, right?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Right. So when you are engaging with Claude, do you trust Claude more than you trust the people in your life?
Depends on the people. I like to, Joe and I were talking about this recently. It's good to, no, I don't trust it more than the people, but it's nice to have it in the mix.
But like, do you trust a hammer more than you trust the people in your life? No, it's a tool. It's not the right, it's not the right question to ask. It's just like, it is performing a service for you, and it can do what it can do. And
I don't know, Joe. Hammer's not telling you, like, helping you make crucial life decisions.
Yeah, and there's no relational piece, right? I don't know, what is it? Claude? Did you say Claude? I haven't used it, so I have no idea. I've used ChatGPT, but there's a very relational aspect, right? That yes, I have no expectation that a hammer is going to give me any life advice. So there's no relational piece with a hammer, but there is a relational piece with any kind of LLM, and I think there are people who are going to trust that.
Right.
You're just really well adjusted, Joe.
No,
right?
I'm definitely not. I'm definitely not. But I experience the relational piece as an illusion.
I mean, Sarah, maybe this is actually just a question to bring it back to neurodivergence and autistics, right? This, like, folks who might otherwise be more socially isolated as a result of profiles, but nevertheless appreciative of a different kind of reciprocity that's mediated, like, what are the potentials and risks there for autistics, for example. I mean, yeah.
So do you think there is reciprocity?
I think being able to, I think we all need to be in relationship. I think we all want to feel seen and understood. And
do you feel seen by an LLM?
Sometimes.
That's mind blowing.
Yes.
Right. So what is doing the seeing?
Yeah.
Andrew is.
Yeah. Well, is that Rumi? It's like what you were looking for is what is looking. It's just, we're just,
Wow.
consciousness looking at itself. I think that what you said before, Sarah, about I have a hard time conceiving of something outside of beyond myself, or I don't know if I'm getting the language right, but yeah, it's difficult, and it's it's kind of the paradox or the challenge that we're in all the time in terms of seeing the difference and also the connection and the relationship, and there's an internal element to that, and then there's also an external one, and I guess it's showing up now in our technology too.
Who's doing the seeing when you're seen by someone else, by another human?
Well, I would say they are.
Yeah, but who are they? And is that, this is like a bit pushing it a bit, but is that not just a predictive model in your mind that is receiving something from another set of predictive models?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But it still exists. It still has a heartbeat.
Well, the AI exists, but it doesn't have a heartbeat. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have a lot of the things, but it has
Not yet.
Yeah.
That was so ominous with the close mic there.
Sorry.
Not yet.
It's just that science fiction becomes reality. It's just a matter of time before they get the synthetic. I mean, they probably already got them. They probably already got them going somewhere.
You don't need a heartbeat. I don't think.
It's the synthetic.
You don't need a heartbeat.
Well,
what about hormones?
Oh my God, I'm the worst person. I'm a terrible human. I got to stop this interview right now. Thank God you have a hard stop in 1 minute.
Joe actually is an AI. Joe is actually not a real person, Sarah. I'm the human here, but you've been interacting with him this whole time.
He's an SLM, a small language learning model.
There we go. I do want to let you go though, Sarah. I'm sorry. This sort of like went off the rails for me in a super interesting way.
This is what we do whenever we talk. We go in like 50 directions. So,
is there anything else that you think we need to just make sure we're capturing about autism, neurodivergence, predictive processing, IFS? Or do we cover it?
Just that? Just anything else?
AI.
Just those things?
Yeah.
And AI and existential questions of whether or not consciousness actually needs a heartbeat.
We try and get to that in every episode.
Yeah, wow. Honestly, at this point, my mind is sort of like running with so many different thoughts. If there is anything we missed, if people think there is anything we missed, they can email me. Cool. I'm an open book. I'm always available.
How can they find you? You want to share us
sarahbergenfield.com, and you can click the get in touch button.
And the book again?
Wired to Feel, April 2026.
Can't wait. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you guys so much. That was super fun.
Thanks.